So recently I had the opportunity to try out the brand new Fujifilm X-M5. This camera is on loan from Fujifilm. They were kind enough to allow me to use it for a few weeks and give it a good test run. Now for me, I'm only looking for something to be a backup camera, something that would be beneficial in event photography, which is the primary thing that I photograph, and have a good, decent web camera. And I have to say, this camera performed really, really well on all fronts. So let's go with the autofocus. I took it out to Portsmouth, New Hampshire to give it a good test run. And the test that I did was very simple. I basically stuck on a 33mm lens and I walked. I didn't aim the camera, I just had it directly in front of me, but then I just walked. I wasn't even looking. And as I came across people, I would just photograph to see if the autofocus would catch them. And I gotta say, the success rate was pretty good. I had about a 95% success rate. The 5% that didn't work was mainly due to my own aiming error.
However, I think it's important for me to share with you the photos that did miss. In this shot, I have two people crossing the street, and you could tell by the first photo that the two people are a little bit on the blurry side. But the next shot immediately after, they are tack sharp. It's the same here. One of the shots that was taken comes in a little bit on the blurry side, but due to the continuous autofocus, the next shot came in tack sharp. So here's a few more photos, and I gotta apologize because I'm either walking and filming or I'm walking and photographing. I can't do both, unfortunately, at the moment. So the photos may seem a little bit random compared to the background that I'm videoing. However, I did run into modern day and real life versions of Jay and Silent Bob, so I think that's a bit of a win. I went inside this really cool restaurant where this guy was making pizza, and he allowed me to photograph him in his restaurant, and this was really cool. Apologies for the warm tones. It was a very warm tone interior. I didn't have any other external lights to use, but I think this really shows the low light capability of the camera and being able to photograph with the continuous autofocus and having the face partially obscured, then re-obscured. But the Fujifilm X-M5 handled this like a champ.
With the autofocus being better than normal Fujifilm cameras, how was it to just use the camera? Well, that's where my criticism really comes into play. Let's get into the ergonomics, because this is the part where I really have an issue with. The ergonomics on this camera are really tight. It's a small camera. It is remarkably small. This camera really feels claustrophobic. And while the performance is stellar, being able to use this camera without any kind of additional grip or a gimbal, I think that's where my quibble is. Because there's a lot of times where I use this camera and my hands just got in the way. When I photographed some casual moments in Portsmouth, I found myself changing the ISO a lot. I don't know how I did it. My hand must have been in the way. Just the grip was not pleasant to hold. And I find myself just trying to I feel like I'm walking on broken glass. I'm trying not to get cut. In this case, I'm trying not to hit unwanted buttons. I changed the ISO from automatic ISO selection to other values, and I don't know how I did it. And it happened many, many times. That's my biggest gripe with this camera, that it is probably too small for its own good. I mean, the way to solve this is to buy a grip to this. Like, I'd probably buy that small rig cage that would give it an additional grip, give it more surface area to hold on to. And if I were to use this for video, I would use a gimbal, because this camera does not have IBIS. It has a digital stabilizer, but it's the stabilization is okay at best. And without having the stabilization, I'm just shaking this thing like crazy.
So with testing out of the way, I decided to have a little fun. I basically stopped testing the camera. I threw on a Pro Mist filter on the 33mm lens, and I just walked around and photographed just whatever caught my interest.
With all that out of the way, let's get into the more important thing. Is this camera fun to use? Again, I'm looking for a backup camera. I'm looking for a web camera. I'm looking for something that is going to be easy, portable, and, pick it up right out of the gate and be able to use it. To all that, I say yes, 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 and yes. It is super dependable. It is easy to set up, and you're on the fly, ready to go. I used this on one of my podcasts and was able to film the whole thing without the camera overheating, and the focus was on point the whole time. There was no searching, there was no pulsing. I was really impressed with its performance. And I did the podcast for over an hour, so not a single moment of overheating. It was really good. The part that I have a problem with is actually the ergonomics. I got big meaty hands, so holding onto this camera was difficult. It wasn't comfortable like the XE4 was. XE4 was a small camera, but it felt like I had a lot of surface area to properly hold the camera. This camera feels very claustrophobic. There were many times where I changed the ISO on this camera. I mean, the solution is pretty easy. Be able to buy an L bracket grip, or maybe even the small rig cage that is made for the X-M5. that would alleviate the issue. The camera on its own, very hard for me to use to do any kind of photography. As far as video goes, I'm not really big onto videography. Again, when I was podcasting with this, the camera performed very well. So ultimately, am I going to buy this camera? I think the answer is yes. Now, originally, I wanted to buy the X-T50 as my backup camera. But the X-T50 is also like $1,400, $1,500. It's a little bit on the pricier side, whereas this camera is just under $800. I think that alone is going to make this more appealing, and you have a lot more video options with this camera than you do with the X-T50. And again, this camera was a lot of fun to use, despite the ergonomic issue that I had. The ergonomics can be corrected with a simple accessory. So anyway, that's my thought on this camera. I hope it was helpful for you. And by the way, I had this video set up days ago, and right as I was about to launch the video, Fujifilm released their big firmware update for the X-T5 and the X-T50 and the X100VI and so forth. It was a shock, but I recorded this whole video using my X-T5. The autofocus is performing really, really well. And so I have no problems right now. The video is at least, I hope, a little bit of a consolation to people who are wondering if the new firmware was going to be good or if it was going to be bad. It's pretty good so far, knock on wood. So anyway, that's all for this video. I'll see you next time.